Beautiful. All right. Hopefully you can all see my screen here. As I mentioned, I apologize for I don't apologize for being sick, but I apologize for any effects that may have on my ability to present today. My voice is the biggest problem, and I might go on mute to have coughing fits every once in a while, but hopefully I'll turn this over to Alex shortly and you won't have to listen to me banter. My name is Jay Leask. I am the Director of Federal Strategy and the National Security Director for AvePoint Public Sector. AvePoint is, in marketing speak, the leader in M365 data management solutions. The long story short is we've been supporting the Microsoft stack for a little over 20 years now, starting as a backup and recovery tool, very quickly expanding into migration, into the management of the platform, and now we have a SaaS-based tool set that allows us to manage not just Microsoft 365, but to provide backup and recovery across a number of other SaaS systems such as Google, Salesforce, and I won't continue with that level of marketing. What I want to focus on is how we have taken that stack and started to talk about zero trust with our customers. So if you want to learn more about AvePoint and who we are and what we support, very happy to have that conversation offline. When it comes to zero trust, and I'm preaching to the choir on this one. In fact, I'm probably the lowest level person in the choir telling the choir how to sing. When it comes to zero trust, this is typically the conversation we are having with our customers and our partners. I know this comes straight out of the CISA guidelines and out of Gerald's presentation on zero trust. One of the things that we've noticed when talking about Microsoft 365, when talking about how zero trust affects the collaboration data in Microsoft 365 is there's a bit of a gap in what is being covered when we look at these pillars. And it's not that these pillars don't say what it needs to say, it's how it is interpreted as this comes down to the M365, the collaboration system owners. What we've noticed is by talking about at the data level and the user level specifically, we're missing a lot of the data that needs to be secured because we are getting too granular in where we are suggesting that this happens. We are definitely talking about DLP. We are definitely having conversations about managed metadata and how that can support the security and policy of your data. But again, if we rely on the data to be where we're getting the information of what policy should be applied, we miss the opportunity because users are notorious for not only not selecting data, but when they're forced to select data, or select tagging, that is, they select the wrong tag. You know, if you go back to just a simple knowledge management conversation, one of my favorite examples of how bad users are at tagging data so that we can secure it is I was listening to a vendor talk about their automated tagging tool. And they said they sat down 17 government records managers, and they said to those records managers, here's 100 files, tag them so that we can properly understand what outcomes need to happen to those records and how should we store them, and then what happens to them when we're done storing them. And they found that no two records managers tagged that information the same way. And these are professionals whose job it is to understand the regulation and to set the instruction as to what outcome happens to these files. These are your librarians. And so if you think about security at the same level and you put the tagging of data to set policy, to set DLP on the user, you run the risk of those users, again, not just tagging it improperly, but selecting aardvark or something with an underscore, because that's the first tag that came up. So one of the things we've noticed is that if you take the tagging of data up a level to the workspace, And by workspace, I mean the team, the Microsoft team, the container, the SharePoint site collection. If you take the tagging of data up to the workspace level, you have a better chance of ensuring your data is secured where it needs to be secured without over securing the entire system. And what I mean by that is when we work with an organization who's looking to do this, they are saying at the time a workspace is provisioned, how will this workspace be used? Who is going to have access to it? And that who is a role-based who? Is it people of a particular contract? Is it people of a particular role within the agency? What type of regulated data will exist in this workspace or is expected to exist in this workspace? And with that information, now you can set at the workspace level policy information about life cycle. How long do we need to keep this, and what should happen to this workspace when that time comes up? Should we offer a renewal so they can keep it longer? Should we archive or delete it? Should we take anything inside of it based on how that's tagged and move that to a particular location before we dispose of it? You can also do things, again, this is a zero trust conversation from a permissions perspective. If I know ITAR is going to exist within a Microsoft team, ITAR being export controlled data, I can restrict foreign persons from being granted access to the team so that if something hasn't been tagged properly, it can still be protected at that team, that workspace level. And then more importantly, what if there is a foreign person who should have access? Well, I can create a workflow on that team that when someone who is identified as a foreign person is added, we have the ability to get not just approval from the business owner to say, does this person have the right to know, the need to know, excuse me. We can then add someone like the cybersecurity team, the export control team, to say, does this person have the right to know? And so we can combine those things at the workspace level, not just the file level. And you can go all the way down that list, making sure that you capture, making sure that in the most sensitive spaces, we are tagging the majority of that data and then looking for the exceptions of what can be exposed outside of that user group, rather than, again, relying on the user to say, this is a piece of sensitive data, it should be regulated with these policies, and then assuming that we've captured everything that way. Now, the reason this is so important is because Microsoft 365 and modern collaboration systems in general, they are free and open systems. They are designed so that the business user, the mission worker, can accomplish their task as easily as possible with as few barriers as is necessary. And every CISO I've spoken to about this has said, my job is to enable the mission worker, the business owner, to be able to accomplish their job safely. And to accomplish that, these tools really do give capabilities that are desired. But if you aren't looking at how do we ensure the data gets the right security, then you are creating a significant risk of data exposure across your system. So one of the examples that we love to talk about is the conversation about who is an administrator, who can set policy over our data. So with Microsoft 365, as a individual user, you have the ability to create a team natively. Now, of course, many agencies are going ahead and creating a system where they have to go through a Power App or the help desk to get a team created. But the goal of Microsoft 365, again, is to empower the user. And by putting that, I'm going to call it a bottleneck where you have to go through a central organization to get everything approved. We've seen where getting a team created can take as long as a couple of weeks because they have to go through the help desk. The help desk has to chase down approvals. Natively, if I go to Teams and I say create a team, I'm good. I'm golden. The key here is not only has a team been created for me, but as the requester, I've been made the owner of that team. Now, the obvious answer is I'm an owner because I know the business. I know how it's going to be used. I should be the person that says, yes, Bill from accounting should have access to my team, so I'm going to go ahead and approve him. But it puts a lot of power in that owner's hand. The owner is also the SharePoint site administrator for the backend site that is created to attach to that team. The owner can go ahead and add other people as owners. They can add other people as administrators of the SharePoint site. And so if you are using a central method for creating your teams and you are creating the requester as the owner, even if you add your own staff, your own IT staff as an owner as well, that requester can remove them. Not maliciously necessarily, but you do give that person the ability to change the policy, the security of that team. And that gets very scary for people. You have, they have the ability to change classifications, names. They can delete the entire thing, whether or not it's an appropriate time to do that. They can share documents with anybody in the organization, whether or not it's been, if it's been tagged, they can change the tag. So there's a number of things that we are giving them that in a zero trust methodology, they shouldn't have access to do. And the key is you need to find a way to do that, to give them the power they should have without over privileging them. And that's where my colleague Alex is going to get in to show you how AvePoint does that. The other side of this is in the government and the federal government especially, we are seeing a shared landscape where we used to have a very segregated landscape. So with Microsoft 365, not only do we have all of these technologies coming into a single stack, we have, and we'll use Department of State as an example. So not only are these technologies, the user management, the workspaces and sites and teams, the individual files in OneDrive coming into one technology, but we also see different organizations that used to have their own file share areas. They used to have their own SharePoint farms all coming into one collaboration space. And where most people think, hey, this is the Department of State's tenant, it is the Department of State's data. What we really have is a combination of data from different bureaus, different organizations across the Department of State, having a single area where all of their content is stored. And when you go back to that conversation of who is the administrator for these workspaces, how do we set administration of these workspaces so that the diplomatic security SharePoint admin has management over all of their SharePoint sites, but not management over the Office of Inspector General, where we have very sensitive information in all of those workspaces. You have to, you start to realize that, again, Microsoft 365, making it easier to work, make it easier to collaborate, is also enabling, in these large shared tenants, is also enabling very easily the ability to over privilege your users. Are there any questions on what we're talking about here, what the problem statement is that we're talking about? All right. If there are, feel free to come off mute and let me know. Oh, I do see something in the chat. Let me see. Sorry, I just realized I wasn't looking at it. Would we? Oh, yeah. I will definitely send a copy of the slides over to ATARC, and we can get them distributed that way. So I mentioned, how do we help support this? How do we ensure that we're not over privileging users? One way is this concept of delegated administration. Now, Microsoft natively does delegate administration across services, across roles. So that is the very first piece. You can set a service admin for SharePoint or for Teams. You can set a license control admin. But when you think about what that person can do, I don't want to give SharePoint Service Administration to someone in the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, because they will have SharePoint administration over the Office of the Inspector General as well. And so you want to combine that functional delegation that you get natively with Microsoft 365 with a scope of content. And AvePoint accomplishes this through an abstracted management layer where you can combine a scope of content saying all of these teams, all of these sites, all of these mailboxes belong to the Bureau of Diplomatic Security. And Alex is the administrator of SharePoint for that bureau. And that abstracted management layer allows you to give that person specific administration controls without giving them those administration controls over other workspaces, over other bureaus and organizations. In order to do this, in order to make sure that users can accomplish what they need to accomplish without giving them too much privilege, and in order to make sure each of your offices, your bureaus, have the ability to manage their workspaces without being over-privileged to have access and management of other offices and bureaus, AvePoint takes these 5 steps in order to support it. The very first thing we do is make sure you have a means to catalog your workspaces. So Alex is going to show what that catalog looks like. He's going to show what information we're collecting about those workspaces, so we can see what type of sensitivity does that workspace have. We can see what office does that workspace belong to, and any other mission-based information that you need in order to have the security and outcomes that you need to have on those workspaces. With that catalog of workspaces, we can now look at prioritizing security issues. So if we know that a workspace is going to have ITAR, export control data, or contract data, things that have to live up to cost accounting standards, then we can set the policies on those workspaces, and then we can focus our efforts, whether they're manual or automated, of looking for secure, sensitive information where it doesn't belong on the workspaces that aren't identified as having that data, as expecting to have that data. We can also go to the next spot. We can automate policy enforcement because we know a team is going to have ITAR data. We can programmatically set the controls so that you can't add someone using the native capabilities. You have to come through our service catalog. And through that service catalog, you can add someone, and then the approval process can go to the manager of the workspace, the business owner. It can go to the cybersecurity team. It can go to multiple levels at at different times, whether it's parallel or linear. And so you have the ability to automate that policy enforcement, which takes the creation of workspaces and the management of workspaces. It takes it from a multi-day, multi-week scenario down to hours, potentially, with that automation. And then you want to monitor what's important. So you want to make sure you have a means to identify the risk of exposure. You want to know that something has been marked as ITAR data, but somehow a sharing link has been created that allows that data to be shared with anybody in the organization, anybody in Active Directory. So you want that ability to look for that risk of exposure. And then lastly, you need to be able to validate your outcomes. You need to be able to ensure that, yes, we said we're going to follow these policies, we're going to apply them here. Here's where they've been applied. Here's where there would have been a risk of exposure, but we've been able to block that with the automation of policy setting. And so these are the 5 pillars that Alex is going to walk you through with AvePoint's solution. Before I turn it over to Alex, I do want to, again, give you the opportunity to either raise your hand, ask a question in chat. This is all accomplished with AvePoint Online Services, our SaaS platform. Our SaaS platform is in Azure Gov. It is FedRAMP authorized, FedRAMP moderate authorized. And you can see on our FedRAMP marketplace that it is supported by multiple agencies there. Are there any questions, or should I turn this over to Alex probably a little bit sooner than he had expected and hoped? All right, Alex, I think you're up, sir.
Beautiful. And it's not going to let me share the screen until you unshare, Jay, for some reason. So we're going to need some cooperation.
Can stop share.
I
You're up,
don't even
sir.
know. Beautiful. And I guess we'll pick up where Jay left off for continuity purposes here. But as Jay mentioned, right, in our first effort to present this zero trust posture, the first thing we really need to do is catalog those workspaces. And hopefully this screen is working. Looks like it is. And cataloging those workspaces is important because this helps me understand what my end users and what the different organizations part of my tenant can leverage and are leveraging. And they're two different things. It's important because I have to define those workspaces or define what that catalog looks like. For example, Jay had mentioned I may want to gather metadata around sensitivity and business purpose when users ask for a new workspace like a team or a group. But also I may want to, again, filter later on by all that information. Show me all, for example, workspaces that have a certain business purpose or are externally facing and have groups of, guest users of in the membership table. So the first step is being able to, again, visualize what's out there and filter on those different criteria, because that's what's going to inform our decisions to, for example, take those surgical security changes that we might need to change, right? For example, Jay mentioned we're going to take a look at content that may have sensitive content in a workspace that we have not defined it as supposed to have been housing that content, right? For those workspaces that we know have sensitive content, we can manage them a little bit more leniently or a little bit, from a 30,000 foot view, but we may need to surgically go in and find out where that content exists, where it should, and where it shouldn't. So let's go take a look what that looks like. And as Jay mentioned, we're going to be looking at solutions that live in AvePoint Online Services. Online Services is AvePoint's platform for solutions for all kinds of management across M365 and other cloud services. So the first big piece that I think is important to us, as you mentioned again, is that catalog, right? A workspace report is something AvePoint defines as a way to hopefully give us better information than what's in the admin center, which is why I had that other user up, right? If we were to look at just a general SharePoint admin center and what my active sites look like, I can see the site name, the URL. Generally, if it's team enabled, I have to kind of switch through my columns to see if groups are part of that particular workspace, and I start to understand where the content and collaboration is happening. But as far as filtering and searching and the type of metadata here, fairly limited. So if I wanted to see all sites with a certain sensitivity label or all sites with a specific primary admin, right, the type of filtering I can do is fairly basic out of the box, right? Drop down menu types. And again, this is not stuff that I might have asked a user to give to me when they're creating the team. It's just general metadata as part of a workspace. So what AvePoint tends to look at is a little bit more information around, for example, what that workspace might have been for, when it was created, how long it's been around, maybe the last time it's been checked to see if the membership is correct or if the metadata is correct. I mean, I have users that have tasks in my environment that it's their job to attest every 6 months, every year, whatever works for me, based on the workspace type to determine if this is still worth it. So the kind of metadata that we saw in the admin center as compared to what we can filter by here is immeasurable, right? I could say, show me all workspaces with particular sensitivity or classification, all externally sharing team-enabled workspaces, right? This allows me a massive improvement and leg up on identifying what kind of content is out there and identified and attested to. Because as Jay mentioned, we provide a couple layers of, I would say, business ownership over content than what we can achieve out of the box. For example, we've mentioned the idea of a contact. The contact is a business owner, somebody that doesn't necessarily part of the team. And as Jay mentioned before, we know that there are risks that come with granting or allowing our general user population to technically own a team. To recap, as an owner of a team, I'm also the SharePoint site collection administrator of the underlying SharePoint architecture. So every file that gets added to that team, or any channel or any private channel, right? A secure site, a uniquely secured site that might get created as part of that team. That user would be the owner of it. And they can change your global policy against that. It might be DLP, it might be sensitivity, it might be the permissions. And actually, again, like you said, removing the central IT team from being able to administer that site alongside the particular agency. So a lot of our customers are starting to elect that we don't have users, just general users that own teams. We leverage these contacts to decide, is the membership okay? Can you ensure that the metadata we've applied to this, to these items is up to date, or should it be changed, right? 2 years ago when this team was created, it wasn't holding sensitive content. But today it does. It holds some sensitive content, right? That is something that can and should change, right? That sensitivity label, whether it be every 6 months, every year. But again, as the environment and workspace matures, so should the attestation process for that workspace. So I'll pause there as kind of our first look into to what we can achieve here. Any questions, comments there from the audience?
Yeah, the one thing I'll add to what Alex is pointing out here is that metadata we're collecting, it is entirely based on the needs of your organization. So yes, there is system metadata like created and lifecycle tasks and such, but the the deeper metadata focused on what is the business purpose, what is the expected security level, who is the owning organization, what is the sensitivity. These are the kinds of things that whatever your organization will need to be able to report on, whatever outcomes will be affected by, that is the information that can be collected, stored, and acted upon in this. So from a zero trust perspective, making sure that we know what's supposed to be there, what's not supposed to be there, what policy should be enforced on that. And then going to the security level that Alex talked about, making sure that if it is a highly sensitive workspace, we aren't over privileging that user, and we're able to run the policies that need to be run on it. Thanks, Alex.
Great point, right? This is meant to be driven by, again, business need, and every business and every organization is going to have slightly nuanced and needs, right? So we need flexibility within a solution to be able to provide those types of services, right? In order to get a catalog of the things that I've got out there, I got to first create them and make them available to those users that should have them available to them, right? For example, I might have, the Office of Inspector General may not have any needs to share externally. Everything is all within the internal organization. So anybody from OIG might be automatically routed to a particular type of workspace that when they request it, it's already internal. It's private, no external sharing is enabled, and they don't have that site ownership, so they can't change that and go against the overall organizational policy. And again, fully customizable by our customers, because again, those needs are going to arise not only per organization, but per agency or per department, right? Each segment within the business has different needs. So great point, Jay. And I think that kind of leads us to that next pillar here. That next pillar is really prioritizing security issues on content where it matters most. And that comes with kind of an asterisk, right? A little bit of an understanding that we may have defined already workspaces that have content I have to be concerned about, or have a watchful eye over, or have a policy to enforce. If I'm carrying sensitive data, I probably have labels enabled to determine the life cycle of those particular documents, and even maybe the destruction of the workspace or the documents themselves, because I don't want them in my environment certain times. Again, I've got some pretty great features from Microsoft out of the box already enabled to manage content that I can identify very well. However, we've seen that identifying every piece of that information, like where sensitive content may live, is not always easy. So while we do have dedicated repositories for that content, we can also assume that there are users either abusing their elevated privileges today, whether it be maliciously or not. But again, not knowing that they shouldn't do that, so to speak. So again, AvePoint takes a posture of saying, I've already got policies that I might out of the box set up on those repositories. So I need tools to be able to help me surface where that content might exist and lock it down. So when I do find sensitive content, for example, in a place where that shouldn't be, I need to be able to assign a line in the sand, right? A true policy that will block or prevent certain types of behavior or activity against that content until I can establish a more sustainable, repeatable, or automated governance policy for that particular workspace. So this is a kind of a more surgical situation, in our opinion, where we're going to go after items that require ad hoc attention. So let's go take a look again what that would look like with some of these solutions. Perfect. So policies for M365 allows a delegated user, and this might be again someone that from a central owner of the tenant delegates out to a particular agency to be able to control their content if they'd like, or it's something that the central team can control for the entire org. It really, again, is made to fit within the organizational structure of really any customer. So that said, if I define a particular risk, so if I've got content that I found that is sensitive in a workspace that's really meant for more open collaboration, well, I might want to start to create those surgical policies to control either more additional sensitive content from being added, or maybe I want to prevent specific groups from being able to be added to these workspaces because of it. So I can assign policies both to the entire tenant, which, as we've defined, might not be great for everyone, right? Everyone has different needs. So while that might be very helpful for blanket needs of the organization, this is how we attack those where, again, we don't want to overprivilege users, but we don't want to stifle their adoption and usage of our investments. So I've enabled external sharing across my whole tenant so that one or two agencies can use them, right? So I'm using a tool like policies to go find those sites or teams or groups or whatever it might be to create rules against those particular workspaces that might enforce, for example, sharing settings specifically on those, right? I've identified sensitive content on a team that has external sharing enabled. It really shouldn't be that way. So you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a rule that says only allow certain members of the organization to this group or team. I may also want to control more internally, right? If they can create or modify the membership of the existing group of that workspace, right? Who can be added, who can't be added. So this allows me to be inclusive or exclusive about how open this content should be, how available should it be to the general population of the organization.
So Alex, might you do something like have a group for contractors versus government employees, or a group for citizens versus foreign persons, and be able to restrict based on that group membership?
1000%. Yeah, we can do that obviously out of the box groups. If you're that organized, we can even assign groups within the solution itself to create filters, right? Hey, let's use a policy or filtered group here to say everyone except for those citizen users that we've defined here. So great question. And I think what also is nice is that while these policies run, they're meant to run in the background. Yeah, it's surgical. I can make this change now, but it also allows me to leave it in place to say if anybody were to try to make this change again. Remember, we've got users out there that own teams. They can change stuff, right? So if they go back and say, oh, I tried to do this and it's been, it's been reverted. Well, I can have policies go out there and do that action in an automated fashion for me again and again and again if this particular offense were to occur again and again and again. So that's just one way to use policies. Again, I don't want to go into every type of option, but this might also control things just like orphaned content, right? We might have sensitive content that's out there that has users that don't own the workspace. There's no owner. So when a change needs to be made or a setting needs to applied or a label needs to be assigned, we don't really have a user that we can go to for that purpose. Again, so I can start to enforce ownership and membership of these workspaces that if anything were to no longer be around, right, I can start to an election process perhaps, right, or at least identify me that there is an orphan workspace today and not 2 years from now. All right. Questions, comments from the audience, or if Jay wants to pipe in too. I know he's got that voice beaten up by a bug today. If not, we can always pop back here as we need.
Yeah, let's
But I do want to
stuff.
let's keep moving, yeah, because I think this speaks to that next step in that automation of policy. Right, this is great that we've been able to take action where it matters. And we've been able to set up a recurring action to help clean up that type of behavior again and again in the future. But when it comes to automating policy, this might speak to who's requesting those particular workspaces in the first place. If an agent of the Office of Inspector General requests a team, the settings and options that are part of that workspace, the membership and security, the sensitivity labels that we've applied to it are going to be different than those of another capstone user or again any other agency that might be part of the overall tenant. So we can actually use things like user metadata, for example, Active Directory properties like department or region or office or city, whatever we're using religiously here in Active Directory is something that I can use to my advantage to automate what kind of services in that catalog are even offered to users when they want to create a team. Right? If we have a process for needing guest users added to our environment to collaborate with us in that team, rather than, again, going up to a central IT team and going through a manual process, we can build that automation into the workspaces that these users are already familiar with, Teams or SharePoint. So let's go take a look at what some of that might look like. And I think the real important part here is that gathering this information might be, for example, a provisioning task, meaning I need a new workspace, or I need a new member added to this team, right? Those types of changes. I need to provision or add or get a change made. Again, typically in an organization, we see that going through a ticketing process, or a lot of times even archaically an email, right, to a centralized team. AvePoint provides a feature set called My Hub that allows a user to perform these types of actions right within the workspaces, again, they're familiar with. So right in Teams. This is an enterprise app. It could be added as a group policy to everyone or specific agencies, but it provides an interface for the user to, for example, make a request for a new workspace. Hey, I need a new team. And in that request, we would build in that metadata request. For example, who needs this? Who are the users that are supposed to be the owners and contacts, and how do we get membership for this particular workspace? But I think the key here is that it also allows them a to-do list, meaning once this workspace is created, the automation starts then, right? How often do they have to attest that the membership has changed, or the secondary data owner is still part of the organization, or that this content still houses no sensitive data, right? The classification is public. Well, that could change over time. So again, it might be every 30 days, 90 days, 180 days, might be after an inactivity threshold. So the process here is not always, do I need something new, but maybe I've got tasks. Maybe I have those responsibilities that are automated to me. So for example, I might have a particular site that's been out there that I have to confirm a policy on. Or maybe I've got, which tenant am I in here? Oh, that's why. Excuse me. Let's pull up Rita here. That was a little bit more of an administrative user. So again, a delegated user, a user that comes into the same workspace, they might have those tasks to apply. And this is something that we can build into the life cycle management of any workspace that gets requested or already exists in your environment today. So when a user comes in, not only can they see all the information about the team, who's a member, right? Any modifications to the actual content that might have happened, or specifically, what kind of these life cycle actions might have occurred, when it was created, if it has an expiration, for example, if there's a task to extend that lease, for example, any of those types of renewal tasks can be reported on. But again, this user might be in task with the responsibility of actually doing that. So in her to-do list, she can see she has to renew a site collection and renew a guest user, right? These are workspaces that have been around maybe for more than six months, and we want to make sure that they still should have permissions or they still have the right sensitivity label. So this user is put through an automated process to renew a workspace or renew a user they've invited from another org, and it gives this user the option to update that information that we might have gathered right from the start. For example, I don't need this workspace anymore, or I'm not even the owner. I don't know why I'm being asked to renew it, right? We can escalate that to the proper individual. Okay. And it gives that user some context about what might be in this team before they start to renew it. Hey, when I created this 2 years ago, there was no sensitive data. There was 10 users, had almost no data. And now they're sharing links. There's highly risky items, sensitive content, and a whole lot more users and owners apparently that have been added since the creation of the workspace itself. So again, this user gets the opportunity now to say, you know what, Rita, of course I'm here, I'm the one doing it, but Mergon maybe should be updated with another user, for example, right? We can update that new contact information or owner, membership, whatever it might be, and move on. And this allows them to test at any level of that workspace that's important to me to again, thinking back to our catalog from our first step, might be important for me to filter or group together or organize a general report for all my sensitive content or all my workspaces with sensitive content, all of my workspaces that have a particular contact or user, either owning or as a member of that workspace. Right. Again, that catalog allows me to look back, show me all of my risky content, anything that might be holding highly exposed content, meaning it's shared with external people or shared with large groups. You could define what that exposure looks like, or highly sensitive, right? Again, might be credit card numbers, it might be contextual information. Again, our customers are leveraging all different types of facets because of information to define what sensitive means to them. So this allows us to be highly flexible to what we want this user to be able to test to. And when it comes to security, we might find things like sharing links, right? Things that we might want to see who it's shared with, how people can access this content, and allow this user to update or remove any kind of risky behavior that might have been, again, against the organizational policy. I thought I heard a question there for a second. Was there anybody speaking up?
Yeah, no, this was Jay jumping in. So one thing I wanted to kind of support here is this is a potentially regular user, whether it's a delegated to an administrator or is the owner of the workspace, the business owner, the mission worker of the workspace. And one of the things I wanted to point out here is for that person to go into SharePoint, to find all of the sharing links, to find all of the broken inheritance on their own, that is a hard start to begin with. But then to know simply by looking at it what type of risk of exposure we're looking at, that's another piece that from a zero trust conversation, we want to make sure that only the people we want to be looking at this content can look at it, and B, that we have the information required to make the right judgment on it. So that's one of the things I love about this screen is you don't have to be a doctorate of SharePoint permissions, because I truly think it's that complicated. We're bringing you the combination of the SharePoint permissions with that risk into one screen. Thanks, Alex.
Appreciate it. Yes, and I think that um, that speaks to, again, all layers of how we're utilizing this workspace, whether it be a sharing link or if that's turned off at the tenant level, they can't leverage that. It might be simply metadata or the permissions and membership of that workspace. Um, Not each one of these controls is as important to the next organization as it was to the last. So the things that we might want to consider standardization around and automation around might be the look and feel. It might be the types of retention and policies and archiving and disposal rules of this content. It might be just the general creation of this, right? It just allows us to gather that information so we can then have a catalog that's reportable and repeatable, right, for the future. But every organization is different. Sometimes a naming convention to their workspaces is all they're really looking for in order to quickly sift together which workspaces belong to which agency, and that's fine. But naming conventions with automated sensitivity labels and updating those and providing that venue for end users to keep that information current and up to date is key. So that kind of brings us to our next pillar in this conversation, and that's really monitoring what's important, right? I want to not just be able to have to go into a big report and filter and sift. I mean, that is super helpful when I need it, but I want also solutions that might be going out there and look for things that might be risky, right? As Jay mentioned, this is a regular user out here that's a member or perhaps an owner of this team, but when we take over the responsibility and ownership of these workspaces, it should be on us. The owner should be on us to identify, hey, there is new content here that has changed the status of this workspace. To yesterday, it was public facing and no classified information, and now today it's full of private, secret, sensitive content. So how do we get that monitoring or notification and do our daily duties, right? So we don't want to be digging for it, so to speak, is what I'm inferring. So looking at some of, again, AvePoint solutions, let's go pop into insights. And I've got so many users. Let's go pop into insights. And insights, I think, pairs well with policies, which we looked at previously, right? I've assigned a rule that put a line in the sand, stopped a certain behavior from happening. I did that because I was informed, right? I did that because I was given the information that says this shouldn't happen. I wouldn't just, delete stuff without, again, a content due for disposal report. So again, same idea. Insights provides me the outlook and insight into what might be out there. What kind of external links? How many sensitive items? Where do they happen to live and exist? Right? I have 600 and plus teams. 42 of them have guest users, and 49 of them have high-risk items. Well, I'm kind of curious, of those 624, and of those 400 that do have, or 42 that have sensitive information, how many of them are also shared with external users? And if we think back to our admin center in M365, right, this is my site list. I don't know how I'm going to marry all that information together. I can see the external sharing settings. I don't necessarily know who they are. I'd have to go into these workspaces and run permissions reports just to see who those users are. Okay. Additionally, I would have to see, again, sensitive items. I could see that there's a label applied to those workspaces out of the compliance center, but I can't see specifically what that content is unless I start to, again, dive into it a little bit deeper. So what Insights provides for us is a single pane of glass where we're going to surface all that information. So rather than digging for problems, Insights is going to show you where there probably are problems, right? Where there probably are things that need attention. and allow you to rather than sift through hundreds of potentially thousands of different URLs, and hone in on those particular URLs that, again, have those risky types of behavior. Risks could include external users. Risks could include shadow users. Remember, those are users that have access to the underlying SharePoint content, but aren't members of the actual physical team membership table. And if we have users owning the underlying SharePoint site and they know how to use SharePoint a little bit, they might just say, here, assign or excuse me, share with Jay. Now you've got uniquely secured content to shadow users on an underlying SharePoint site that only a few people know even exists, because most of collaboration happens in that Teams group. So again, a shadow user might be a risk to most orgs. So, and then additionally, exposure, right? Not just who it's exposure, but sensitivity. What kind of sensitive content? Hey, there's sensitive content here. What is it, so to speak? Might be a credit card number, might be contextual information. So again, this report's bringing it all to my one particular view. And it also allows me the ability to provide downstream actions. So not only am I monitoring what's out there, but I'm able to say, you know what? This particular guest user is always here. I've been working with him for 7 years. He's a virtual team member at this point. Let's trust this workspace. Let's trust this user so that the next admin that comes in here doesn't have to worry about this particular, risky object. I've attested that it looks risky, but it's not, because we work with them all the time. Or maybe I find this particular use where I do have high exposure and sensitive content, shadow users, right? All kinds of risky behavior happening across this particular workspace. Well, I can run reports like view detailed permissions, view the audit report from here, see what kinds of activities were happening, right? And even make those changes. Hey, I've seen what kind of users have access, who the members are, where they got that access from. I don't love it, so I can remove those permissions and even provide context for the actual action I'm taking.
Hey, James, sorry. Yeah, Alex, one of the things that you mentioned here earlier is the ability to delegate this, not to just the central IT organization, but down to an office administrator, for example. If we go back to my original story, the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, giving them the ability to assign a user to look into this. That's still, we're still talking about that and how that could be supported, right?
Sure, absolutely. So within the solutions themselves and within the foundational platform, AvePoint Online Services, we have layers built in for different levels of role-based control. This might be to the back end, it might be to the physical solutions that you're offering, your content custodians and the people that need these reports. But like you said, specifically, I might need to contextualize the information within the report. So we can create security groups within the solution so that if a user were to log in here, they can only see certain content. Let's take a look at what that looks like. So I have a particular security group here. I've added Rita, who we've taken a look at a couple times today, and Rita's able to only report on particular SharePoint sites. Actually, ones that I've delineated as part of a container. A container is something I might use to logically separate information based on metadata, purpose, just general information like site URL information, whatever it might be. And this allows me to segment the information and then assign responsibility to it through my solutions. The responsibility part's only half of the beauty, right? It also hides the other content from this user, right? So if I want an agent of the Office of Inspector General to be able to report on risky content that might exist within teams and sites and groups that are part of the Office of Inspector General, but not part of another agency, right? This is how I'm achieving that. I'm basically assigning them privileges to report on this group of objects and nothing else. So great question, Jay, right? This is how not only do we put the tools in our hands to achieve or, create that posture, right? Where we can achieve a zero trust architecture in a way that's sustainable for the business. But additionally, right, limit that type of capability when they're using these solutions. So not only is the underlying system, in this case M365, right? Adhering to it, but the solutions that we're putting in your hands to better manage that also fit in that role. So great question, Jay. This architecture, or I guess concept of containerization and security groups, meaning where we can define a delegated content custodian or a delegated owner of this process, is a foundational concept across all of our solutions, right? One
Yeah.
could argue that having a protected copy of my content, a backup, right, is a zero trust methodology, right? Something that allows me to recover from a disaster that wasn't necessarily my fault. Again, same idea. I might want a particular agency to be able to restore content for themselves, but not for other agencies. So again, a foundational layer across all solutions here.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. One of the reasons I wanted to point that up and give you the opportunity to kind of showcase what that looks like is we are seeing more and more the agencies are moving to these large central tenants, but then there are subsets of those agencies that are concerned in moving, especially in the legal or side with like the Office of the Inspector General, where they are getting their own tenants to ensure that they have that segregation, that you know that model of least privilege, to make sure that someone from another office, another bureau, doesn't have any insight into their data that they shouldn't have. And we found that the native capabilities that are talked about with information barriers, they're too restrictive. They're great if you want to fully restrict collaboration between like an Office of the Inspector General and the the Bureau of Diplomatic Security, but it's a they can never collaborate scenario, which defeats the purpose of a system where they're all in one tenant. And so that capability to be able to set your office, your scope of content with those containers, saying this container is all of the diplomatic security workspaces, and then set policy on that container, to be able to set permissions at that container level, to be able to set administration at that container level, I think is part of the gap that's been missing, that's been pushing some offices to get their own tenants.
Yeah, and a beautiful segue into some of the conversation you started with during slides earlier, Jay, where um, the administrative side of the tenant is also something that we're concerned with. It's not just these workspaces, while probably the most important part, it's where most collaboration happens. We also may want to segment the administrative capabilities. Again, taking kind of the responsibility of all tasks and all settings and all policy needs for each one of those agencies and departments, and putting it on one team is probably not the best method, right? It puts a lot of needs for that team to understand why department A needs XYZ versus department B needing ABC, right? So, and a solution like Entrust allows us to also delegate some of those administrative capabilities without giving a user like Rita global admin, SharePoint admin, Teams admin, Exchange admin, right? We're not giving them those out of the box role delegations. We're not allowing them to go visit the admin center, and we're not confusing them with data that's outside of their purview, outside of their responsibility. So Entrust allows us similarly, like we saw in MyHub, right? And we saw in Insights where the reports are tailored specifically to content important and relevant to the user that's viewing them, right? Based on their department or their security group. Well, in this case, same idea. It might be, what kind of Exchange settings or SharePoint policies do we want to enforce and give control over, right? When a user were to come in that's supposed to manage SharePoint for a particular segment of the business, right? They might have options that allow them to create new site collections from scratch. It also might allow them to manage particular settings. And we might want to, again, given that posture of least privilege, I might want them to be able to connect them to groups and trigger workflows and change the admins of this group, but I don't want them to be able to associate it with a hub site. I don't want to change the overall architecture of my managed paths or anything. I just want them to be able to manage the use. So I can, through Entrust, remove or rob them of this this administrative capability, right? While providing them everything else. Okay? And this would be across, again, Exchange, SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams. This is coming into Power Platform and other features that might be in use by your end users. So a way to deliver the right administrative tools and toolkits and switches to those users that you would trust with those types of capabilities. And this also helps that user to, if we're thinking back to our final pillar here, validating our outcomes, right? We've kind of gone through a few options. I think that we've seen a chance to report or review what's out there, right? Validate that this is working, for example. So let's go take a look back just to this renewal process, for example, right? We've already talked about a user being able to see the life cycle of a site within the options here. But once a user finishes a particular renewal or has gone through it maybe several times, this also allows us the opportunity to see that kind of information. Right? We can see that this renewal process is overdue, but it has occurred in the past. Okay, so this allows us a number of ways to validate that what we've implemented is working. So let's go take a look at that particular last workspace report, right? Show me all sites or all workspaces out there that have been that have had a lifecycle task. I think my mouse is moving faster than I am. There we go. All right, so any active lifecycle tasks that might be out there, meaning pending renewals, pending recertifications or memberships, everything that should be attested to is here. Of course, I could report the stuff that has been attested to and is done, but look at the stuff that needs to be done. Not only can I validate that I'm succeeding, not only can I validate that it's working, but I can validate that it has to continue to work. Right? When I look at these particular workspaces without moving forward, I could just simply look at a timeline. That was a terrible example. Let's pull one that we know has been working. Let's actually reset this to select all and or select none. And we'll go grab one that's a little bit more common. And there we go, right? How do we prove that it's working? I validated that the tasks were good for a period of time, but we had to confirm some details as this workspace was actually reassigned in the process of ownership was reassigned to Rita. Right? Originally, it was the admin's fault or excuse me, responsibility, but he was assigned the process to Rita. Now Rita has a job. Well, we just saw in Rita's look here, like, she has some overdue jobs to do here is that Q2 outing site. So the same thing, she can come in and review what's been done, what she needs to do, and start that task. So a number of ways to validate from a more administrative view, right? What's out there based on, say, the metadata I've collected or applied over time, or simply, are these processes that I've implemented being utilized? Are they working, right? Are they being updated or even reassigned, right? Are they being implemented in a way that allows this workspace to live in a sustainable way? That's not to say there's a number of canned reports or capabilities that we could say, go show me all of the active processes or services that are in use that I've created. Again, a number of ways to can or dig out information through reports. But I think, again, looking at the processes we've implemented to achieve this better posture around least privilege, this allows me to validate that we're continually enabling a method across workspaces, ownership, security posture, right? That keeps me in a way that in a posture that, again, assigns the right privilege to the right user across the right workspaces.
So I think,
go ahead, Jane.
yeah, I was going to say, I think we're running short on time here. What I wanted to make sure was that we kind of brought this all home a little bit. So the idea here, clearly we're talking about a system that typically can help with governance. It can help with, we for 17 or so years helped with identifying, permissions issues and such. But the idea is when you're and Alex, would you mind going to the slide with the 5 columns and the workspace on it? The idea is that when you are talking about zero trust with an agency, with your agency, and you're trying to figure out how do we make sure that the data is protected and that the user is not given more permission than they should, which are 2 clear tenets of a zero trust strategy. We find that bubbling up to the workspace level within Microsoft 365 actually gives us more control and more ability to lock down where there is a high risk, but keep open where there isn't a high risk, where there isn't expected to be a risk of data. It also lets us know which workspaces that we do need to focus on, where there isn't expected to be sensitive data. We can put our eyes on to look for when people put stuff that shouldn't belong there, etc. So this workspace column, whether it be a subset of data and user, or it be its own conversation, we think helps to ensure that a zero trust strategy for a collaboration system can actually be successful. And with that, we are here, I believe, within just minutes of being out of time. Are there any questions that you'd like to bring to us to ask us?
I have a question.
Fire away.
All right, and sorry if I missed it. So I get the sense that you guys integrate with DLP. Do you work with MIP or AIP, Azure Information Protection? Is that something you can leverage?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we definitely want agencies to be able to take advantage of the things that they have paid for. So for example, if you are using labels to trigger your DLP, we can help set those labels by understanding what sensitivity is expected in a workspace. We can go ahead and help automate the setting of those labels on the data within it. That's one example. Alex, would you like to talk a little bit more about the intersection with MIP? I think you're unmuted already.
Look at that. I am muted. I was just the video in the browser is fun here, so I'm going to kill that. And but yeah, Jay made some great points about what we can leverage from existing DLP and sensitivity labels you might be leveraging. As he mentioned, we can automate the application of that to particular workspaces. So for instance, if a particular user from an assigned agency asks for a workspace or goes through a request for a workspace, we can automatically assign it just based on who they are. Or we can gather that information subjectively. We'll ask them in plain English, do you expect to have sensitive information here? And that just allows us to simply tag that workspace that, yes, it's going to have sensitive information. However, we also can leverage those existing physical labels, right, too. So during the process, we can even assign that to the workspace, which is something that normally you do to like the object, right? So something that, again, very helpful from I guess, an object or workspace ownership perspective. The other way that I guess that intersection comes into play is during that insights conversation, meaning not only am I digging up risky information, excuse me, right? I'm saying, show me all these risky documents, right? High and medium risk. I might then want to apply a sensitivity label after I've defined why it's risky, right? So eventually we'll all agree, oh, here it goes, right? We've got all these objects I found in my environment that are highly risky, we'll say, because of sensitivity and exposure. Keep that in mind, right? It has credit card numbers in it, and it's shared to large groups and external groups, right? So I've defined this as highly sensitive and highly risky. So not only can I do things like show me who has access and what they've done with it, they downloaded it, right? But I can tag it or apply a sensitivity label right from the screen. So if I have existing ones, you'll see that out of the box, and some of my customized ones are available here, right? I apply that label, and now that's applied and available to the entire population that has access to it. So we can leverage kind of what you've got going on, right? Or we can leverage just simply that it's sensitive, kind of as a metadata overarching field. And in some of our solutions, we even allow you to grant the access to create and apply those types of labels that might be important to, particular agencies. So a number of ways that we can not only integrate but leverage, right, those existing MIP and DLP processes that are out of the box. Hopefully that answered your question, but I'll give you an opportunity to ask a secondary or follow up there.
Nope, that answered it. Thank you.
Beautiful.
Awesome.
Well, I'll give that chance to the rest of the population. Any other questions?
Hey, sorry if I kind of came in a bit late. My name is Abed with USDA, and so what is this tool, aligning with what pillar in the zero trust concept? I'm sorry if this has already been discussed, but I just came in a bit late. I'm going through all the slides, and I'm like, I feel like I'm lost.
I'm sorry, Abed, what is it? How does it align with what specific area of zero?
Right. What pillar within the zero trust, principle that you guys are aligning this tool with?
Great question. So Alex, perfect. You read my mind. So we tend to find that our tool set fits into the data or user category. And what we've pointed out is that our tool set's designed to enable you control at the workspace, which we highlight separately from data and user because it overlaps in both of those areas. For example, the workspace is what contains the data, but it also contains the membership, which is the user side of who can access that data. And so when we have this conversation, we are talking about both the data and user pillar, and we are talking about the intersection of those pillars. We are able to set, for example, data classification, metadata. We are able to set the labels so that your DLP kicks on, and we are able to identify where users have access to things they might not supposed to have access to, and where we can, manage the control of, manage the access to the data itself. And so that's why we see that as an overlap.
Right.
A sub pillar, if you want to call it, but it is an overlap between data and user.
Right on. Okay, thank you.
Great question, Abed. I appreciate that. Anyone else with questions, concerns, anything that resonated that you wanted to discuss a little bit deeper while we have some time here?
Probably a silly question, but if you have a data store, can you have, I assume you can put it like at a default level, so protect this at X, but if it's, if someone goes in there, can they then raise the level of a file? Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead, Alex.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point, right? If I create a team today, and I define it as, let's go to my workspace report. Where did he go? I have so many user profiles open here today. I am very sorry, folks. There we go. So again, thinking about simply like this workspace was created how long ago? The data is here, but let's say it was created 2 years ago. At that day, it wasn't business critical, right? It was just us collaborating on a new project, but it gained legs, right? It got support and funding and budget over the years, and now it's 3-4 years later. Is that team now business critical? Probably, right? So it's not just metadata like sensitivity. I might want to update that particular workspace's just simple purpose, right? Or in this case, a particular tag on the information. So during those lifecycle tasks, we can build that process in to be a responsibility of your content owner to say, hey, every 6 months, just make sure you update. Is this still not business critical, or has it become critical? Is it not sensitive, or is it sensitive now, right? And that process allows you to build in a repeatable, automated, and delegated process, right? That an end user or a content custodian would be responsible for updating. And this allows you to test that it's working. Additionally, during that insights feature, same idea, right? This content might not have been sensitive yesterday, but as insights updates on a daily basis, it's aggregating not only what's out there, but updates to reports from the DLP center, right? If content has been assigned, or content we might have surfaced because Microsoft's already through E3 above licensing looking for certain types of sensitive info types, right? Credit card numbers and so on and so forth. So as that info changes, the physical documents, not just the workspace, we can again update that information, apply a sensitivity label, add a tag, for example, just to kind of be a little bit more passive about it. I'll let you know that we're reviewing it, for example, or it's in progress. This way, if we're not assigning a definitive label, we might have another process for it. We can, again, let the general team know that we're working on that. So a number of ways that we can kind of put that in there. But Jay, go ahead.
Yeah, so I see three primary avenues here. The first one that Alex showed is the end user, the business owner, the mission worker, who during the regular attestation of, yes, I still need this, yes, these permissions are correct, yes, this metadata is correct, or no, as Alex said, the metadata has changed, therefore we can change the policy that supports it. The minute we find out from the mission owner that, yes, the purpose has changed, the sensitivity has changed, we automate updating the policy that supports it. The second here is at the data level, and an administrator can come in and identify that while this is tagged a certain way, the sensitivity of the information itself shows itself as being sensitive, I can manually go ahead and change that. And the third way is similarly, the delegated administrator for a particular container of objects, of workspaces, can go in and modify the metadata associated with those workspaces. So at a workspace level, we can do the user during attestation, the business owner during attestation, or the delegated administrator during their regular duties as an administrator can both change the policy or influence the policy based on the metadata that is stored with that workspace. It's a great question. Thank you.
I think some other things that are also really attractive, I guess, to these solutions is as we mentioned, we have logical separation of content so that we can deliver the right the right content to the right type of administrator, right? Thinking back to kind of this view here, where we've got different levels of content and ultimately different admins administrating that content. So built into that process of separating or logically separating the teams and workspaces, even the users, right? That metadata change can also drive the automation of, for example, those security groups, what they can report on, right? If I have a security group that can report on only sensitive items, only sensitive workspaces today, and somebody updates a workspace to being sensitive from not, right? My report will change tomorrow. Right, it'll have a new URL invited to it because, again, in the backend, it's automatically looking at information like metadata, sensitivity, Active Directory properties, all kinds of things to appropriately align the logical separation of the content and users to the appropriate admins. So again, this happens on multiple levels if you're leveraging this confidence platform. So yeah, as Jay said, I'll echo. Great question.
Yeah. So first of all, thank you. Chris, appreciate the reminder. I was actually about to message you there on the side. We are a few minutes over. If you are interested in reaching out to us, again, we'll get these slides sent out. And when we do have the slides sent out, we'll have our contact information added as a slide so that you can easily reach out and contact with follow-up questions. Also, we're both on LinkedIn. So you're welcome to connect with us and ask questions on LinkedIn using the direct messaging capability there. thank you so much for the opportunity to share this. Yeah, that's all.